Dear audience, as Secretary General of the Norwegian Humanist Association, it is my pleasure and honor to welcome you all to the first Øverland lecture. The first in what is intended to be an annual event on the anniversary lands lecture Kristendommen, den 10. landeplage, Christianity, the 10th plague. The lecture was held 90 years ago today, on the 21st of January 1933, in the Norwegian Student Society, det norske studentersamfunn, in Oslo. Later that year, it was published in the book Tre foredrag til offentlig forargelse, which more or less translates to 3 lectures to cause public outrage. This lecture series will be held in the spirit of Øverland. Lectures to cause a critical approach and in an accessible form. Lectures from clear and distinct voices who have something on their mind and the ability and willingness to say it loud and clear. Øverland and his lecture is important in the history of humanism in Norway. The humanist movement emerged in, and partly as a reaction to, a society where religion was the established way of understanding the world and people's place in it. Øverland's lecture is by far the most famous Norwegian text critical of Christianity and Christian privilege. And criticism of religion has played a significant role in the history of the Norwegian Humanist Association ever since it was founded in 1956. Among those who joined the association of the founding meeting was Øverland himself. But perhaps the most important thing about the lecture in this context is that it, or rather the trial it led to, was decisive in shifting the Norwegian law against blasphemy into a dormant state. No one was prosecuted under the law from the acquittal of Øverland until it was finally repealed in 2015. The fight to abolish blasphemy laws is one of the prime causes of the international humanist movement, not the least fought through Humanist International's campaign End Blasphemy Laws. Because even if Norway finally got rid of its blasphemy law, many countries around the world still have such laws. There is even a tendency in some countries for these laws to be used more than before. Without a free and open public debate about all subjects of importance to society, a liberal democracy simply cannot function. In country after country, we see blasphemy laws used to silence criticism of religion, religious institutions, and religious abuse. And these states often defend their blasphemy laws by pointing to the existence of such laws in Western countries. In other words, even dormant such laws have potential to cause great harm. But it is not just because such laws can be used to silence factual criticism and debate that the right to blasphemy is important. Laughter is an important weapon in the fight against ideas, traditions, and institutions that restrict people's freedom. Sometimes it is necessary to declare that the emperor indeed is naked. Being able to laugh at powerful people and powerful institutions is essential for us to be free. The right to blasphemy is a fundamental part of the freedom of expression. The case against Øverland is thus also a milestone in the history of freedom of expression in Norway. The Norwegian Parliament, against the votes of the Christian Democrats, voted to abolish the law as part of a larger reform in 2009. But the reform had still not come into effect when the massacre in Charlie Hebdo's office took place on the 7th of January in 2015. 3 days after the attack, representatives Anders B. Werp from the Conservative Party and Jan Arild Ellingsen from the Progress Party submitted a proposal the law should be repealed immediately. It was adopted by an anonymous parliament. The process that began with Øverland's lecture was finally complete. This is one reason, but by no means the only one, why Charlie Hebdo's editor, Gérard Biard, was an obvious choice to give the first Øverland lecture. Since its inception in 1970, Charlie Hebdo has been a magazine that holds the banner of freedom of expression high. A magazine whose witty tongue strikes at the powerful and exposes double standards and the abuse of power, both political and religious. A magazine in the spirit of Øverland. A magazine that has paid an intolerable and gruesome price for upholding the right to cause public indignation and outrage. It is therefore with the deepest respect and admiration I hand the floor to Biard to give the first in the series of Øverland lecture. Welcome, Biard. Welcome. I have some water there also. Okay. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you to the Norwegian Humanist Association for this invitation, and thank you all for being there. And sorry if I slip sometime in English. It's not my language, so I'll try to do my best. Thank you. It is common knowledge that the French are hopeless chauvinists. So you won't be surprised if I begin this speech with something typically French. So typical that there is no equivalent English word, nor a Norwegian one, I guess. Therefore, allow me to use the French word, laïcité. It's generally translated by secularism, which is a mistake, I think. Secularism is about how religion deals with societies. Laïcité is about how societies and states deal with religion. As you see, words are important. That's the reason why I'd like to clear up some points in order to be sure that we are all talking about the same thing. We have to agree about the meaning of three words: faith, worship, and religion. Faith is strictly intimate. That's what each believer has is in on earth, and that doesn't concern the state or other citizens. Worship is the way believers express their faith. When this expression is made in a public space, it concerns the state. Religion is political and social organization of faith and worship. It concerns us, and it always concerns the state, because it's all about politics. Now, let's talk about democracy. Democracy is definitely not the most perfect political system ever, but it has a precious advantage over the other ones. It knows that it can be improved. And generally, it works to improve itself. Democracy starts on the basis that any law can be submitted to debate, modification, opposition, and even revocation. Because democracy knows that every society must evolve in order to progress. Divine laws, on the contrary, proclaim themselves immutable, engraved forever in stone. No criticism, no questioning allowed. God exists and he has spoken, period. For the divine laws, society is static. 3.5 centuries passed between Galileo's trial and his rehabilitation by the Catholic Church. It took 3.5 centuries for the Vatican to admit that the earth is not flat and doesn't revolve around the sun. Religious dogmas are therefore incompatible with democracy. It's obvious if we look at what's happening each day in many countries whose laws are based on divine dogmas. No state basing its authority on religious dogmas escapes to the totalitarianism temptation. If anyone claims to submit society to laws and rules that draw their legitimacy from a supreme being, any hope of democracy and equality is illusory. Religion has always been the best alibi for purging the state of its impures, which is the ecumenical name for opponents. God cannot be allowed to enter the political area, for he is an unstoppable tyrant. A dictator eventually dies. A junta can be deposed. It is very complicated to depose God. Those who believe in him will continue to believe, no matter what. It is therefore indispensable, that he remains confined into the intimate conviction of believers. It is unacceptable that he crosses the outer doors of churches, mosques, synagogues, ashram, pagodas, and other temples. This is precisely what laicity protects against. And it also protects believers of all kinds who are always in danger when a religion holds the reins of political power or seek to seize them. Laicity is not, as many people think, a tool for interreligious dialogue. It's just a way to define what kind of society we want to live in. It is a political principle which, in France, is inscribed in the first article of our Constitution and which is governed by a law voted in 1905. Article 2 of this law states the essential in one short, clear sentence. The state do not recognize, pay, or subsidize any religion. The state does not recognize any religion. Religion neutrality in France is not a benevolent neutrality, which, like in some Anglo-Saxon concept of separation of religion and state, recognize all religions. It is a neutrality that can almost be described as atheistic, which recognizes none. The Republic does not believe in God. It considers it just an idea among others. Laicite is not about freedom of religion, it's about freedom of conscience, which is the right to believe or not believe. Of course, it includes freedom of religion, but this freedom is submitted to the acceptance of other opinions, faith-based ones just as faithless ones. Because freedom of conscience implies that faith is just one opinion among others. Moreover, the law of 1905 is a law of public order. It protects faith, which, like atheism, is part of the freedom of conscience, and it guarantees the free exercise of worship as long as it is done in respect of public order and general interest. As for other religious expression, whether they are societal, economics, or political, it frames them, regulates them, even prohibits them. Through the provision of Chapter 5, entitled Police of Worship. In France, the minister in charge of religion is the Minister of the Interior, and it's not by chance. I must remind you that this law was voted after a long and violent struggle between two political powers, the civil political power and the religious political power. This law has its roots in the Enlightenment of 1799 and was voted to contain a religious power that wanted to be hegemonic. It was the state that was defending itself against religion, not the other way around. While we are on the subject of religion and freedom of conscience, I now invite you to ask yourself, do we still have the right not to believe in God? Try a simple experiment. Affirm your faith in anything. Say that you believe in the Immaculate Conception, on the prediction of Nostradamus, on the Klingons living on planet Vulcan, in the immortality of Elon Musk, whatever you want. You will be regarded with benevolence and interest. On the other hand, try to say that you do not believe in any divinity and that, according to you, God is only a postulate far from being verified, a phantasmatic construction intended for some to give meaning to the life and for others to exercise a very earthly and very exclusive power. Say that, and you will be looked as if you had just blown your nose in the cassock of a priest. Religion has once again become an exact science. The term religious fact is now commonly used as if the existence of God were a proven fact. End of discussion. Anyone who dares to contest this existence is seen as boorish and intolerant. We have known since Darwin that man was not shaped in clay by a godlike craftsman. We have known since Edwin Hubble's that and the evidence of the Big Bang that the universe was not created in 7 days, but that it was formed over billions of years. We are advancing more and more in the knowledge of life. Each day brings us additional proof that reason and scientific research are the surest answers to the unknown. But we act as if we were still cavemen trying to explain what we do not know or frighten us by a superior and irrational force. What a short memory we have. Religion, which, let me remind you, is nothing more than the organization of faith for the purpose of social and political control, has always been more a problem than a solution. Every hour, all over the planet, men and women are butchered, tortured, terrorized, and imprisoned in the name of religions. If faith raises mountains, there are mountains of corpses. Despite that, The usual rhetoric is that religions, all religions, without exception, are love. For they embody the most beautiful and purest of human beings. Above all, they embody the genius of God, who creates men to adore him and women to serve meals and give birth to children, preferably boys. Christianity is goodness. Islam is peace. Judaism is wisdom. Buddhism is wholeness. And a few hundred deities who share Hinduism as roommates make the wheel go round. It's therefore inconceivable that any religion could be responsible in any way for any act of violence whatsoever. This explains why when someone kills, massacres, slits throats, hangs, rapes, or tortures his holy name, you will always find innumerable scholars to explain that the cause of so much evil is necessary elsewhere than in religion. In the case of Islam, a religion that produces its share of jihadists and other soldiers of God, where people risk death if they utter the name of Muhammad incorrectly, where zealous spreaders of the good word blow themselves up in the midst of civilian crowds, where all these mass murders are duly planned, orchestrated, and claimed by movements that proclaim themselves Islamists, the trend is even more pronounced. Yet, as soon as an attack is committed, the ritual formula comes. It has nothing to do with Islam. Really? Is that so? But it was an Islamic leader, Ayatollah Khomeini, who in 1989 called all Muslims worldwide to execute Salman Rushdie. The attack on Charlie Hebdo happened because we published cartoons mocking a supposed prophet and thus violated a religious dictate. The number 13 attacks in Paris were claimed by the Islamic State, not the atheistic state. The attacks in London, Madrid, Brussels, Tunis, New York, Toulouse, Strasbourg, Berlin, and the countless massacres in Algeria, Egypt, Iraq, India, Indonesia, Pakistan, Afghanistan, Nigeria, the list is endless, were committed in the name of God. Of course, Islam does not have a monopoly on fanaticism and violence. Catholicism held the pole position throughout history, and some of its followers are still working hard to regain it. Hinduism, driven by a nationalist politician, is increasingly dreaming of Muslim pogroms. The so-called cool Buddhism loses its zenitude when it meets a Rohingya. But it turns out that today it's primarily Islam that is leading a political conquest wherever it is in a position to do so. Islamism is today the most expensive totalitarian political doctrine. Not all the world's tyrants are Islamists, far from it. But Islamist tyranny is rampant in many countries and enjoys a wide open forum at the United Nations. So we must imperatively recall that any religion political discourse, by the simple fact that it gives primacy to a divine law claimed as immutable and unquestionable, carries within the seed of fanaticism, violence, and totalitarianism. Islam is no exception. No religion is by definition of peace or of war. A religion, when it is confined to the intimate, is an existential crutch, a means of simply answering complicated questions, a source of comfort, whatever. In this case, it is only a matter of concern of those who believe in God. But when it extends to the collective, it becomes an instrument of social and political control. And as such, it can subjugate, imprison, torture and kill with the sole aim of exercising a 100% earthly power. Fundamentalism, obscurantism, and fanaticism are not accidents. They are consubstantial to the religious fact. When it descends into the political arena, the current state of religion is totalitarianism, and its tools are brutality and barbarism. Islam is no exception to the rule. To say that the atrocities committed by Daesh or that an Islamic attack has nothing to do with Islam is as silly and inaccurate as saying that the Inquisition or the St. Bartholomew Day massacre has nothing to do with Catholicism. The Quran is not different from any other book or writing proclaimed holy, which claims to lay down rules or thoughts and social life from which is forbidden to deviate on pain of eternal punishment. It produces a discourse, a rhetorical support. Those who refer to it do not read it as a fantasy or fiction, but as a political book, an instruction manual for ordering collecting life. As such, like all political books, it must be open to criticism, discussion, and dispute, not about its style, which we don't care about, but about its purpose and its implications. And its purpose and its implications must be confronted with the aspirations and the scientific knowledge of contemporary societies, which have the right to ignore it, to find it inane, out of date, aberrant, and even dangerous when such is the case. To deny reader this right is to deny the very principle of democracy. I think it's time now to talk about blasphemy. I consider it indispensable to the exercise of freedom of speech, including that of the believer. Moreover, faith in God does not go without blasphemy. If you think twice, only believers really blaspheme. To insult someone or something, or even to make fun of it, one must be convinced of its existence, of its reality. Atheists do not blaspheme. When they say Jesus fucking Christ, they mean nothing more than whoops a daisy. And when they draw, paint, or film divinities and in shaming position, they do nothing more than they would do with the image of a king, a president, or a minister. For blasphemy is nothing more than the expression of a salutary contestation of power, of God's powers in this case, which is recognized, let us not forget, only by believers. It is why it is absurd to claim that blasphemy can be experienced as an offense against the whole of the faithful. We feel offended only when the insult or mockery touch what it is personal or intimate. Yet blasphemy does not attack the intimate God of each believer, but the public figure of God, the incarnation of the dogma that is supposed to impose itself to the collective of the Lordship, as well as on those who refuse to join the flock, at least for the most conquering religions. We can easily understand why the blasphemy enrages the religious authorities and why they have even made it a crime punishable by death in some countries. It upsets a small part of the divine power of which they proclaim to be the eternal guardians and which they have decreed to be indisputable. The crime of blasphemy reveals the indecisively totalitarian nature of religious power. North Korea has labor camps, religion have the crime of blasphemy. In both cases, individuals are forced, under penalty of or severe punishment, to identify themselves with the power and its representations, and to be offended when it is mocked or challenged. In France, insulting God, whatever the name one gives him, is folklore, and his representatives is an old and earthly habit. Our republic was founded, among other things, upon an act that is far from trivial. The king was beheaded. This act did not only have the effect of making Louis the XVI pass from life to death, it also had a highly symbolic impact which continues to this day. Remember that the king reigned by the divine right and was considered in some way as an earthly incarnation of God. By beheading the king, the French people beheaded God. Today, many would like to reintroduce the crime of blasphemy under the argument of protecting the sensitivity and conviction of believers. So ask, could we stop teaching the theory of evolution because it offends the conviction of creationists? Should we stop telling students that the earth is round because some believe it is flat? Should we declare atheists and rationalists to be second-class citizens? Should we validate the strategy of the Islamic World Conference, the Vatican, and all the religious fanatics of the world who want to submit civil law to divine dogmas? This brings us to the semantic swindle called Islamophobia, which today is often considered synonymous with racism. According to that view, we should not criticize propagandist theologians and religious proselytism because that is Islamophobia. We should not make any link between a totalitarian ideology and the effect it produces upon societies because it is Islamophobia. We should not condemn the retrograde speeches of preachers and the sexist practices they advocate because it is Islamophobia. We should not be concerned about the fate of millions of artists, writers, homosexuals, atheists, feminist activists, or simple citizens, victims of Islamism terror throughout the world, because this is Islamophobia. So I ask, who are real racists? We universalists who say that Muslims and all those improperly grouped under this term must obey the same laws and enjoy the same rights as all other citizens? Or those who suggest that they are too primitive to accept democracy and its values, reducing them to their supposed beliefs and tying them forever to an obscurantist text written 14 centuries ago? For the record, one of the first to win the Islamophobia label was Salman Rushdie. Then Taslima Nasrin, Ayaan Hirsi Ali, Kamel Daoud followed. Islamophobia has been conceptualized on the basis of a deliberately flawed premise. To criticize Islam is to insult all Muslims. Therefore, it is racist. To accept this is to accept the idea that all Muslims are inherently Islamists. It is to agree with Trump, Salvini, Orban, Le Pen, who say nothing else. The real racists are those who insist on a so-called Muslim identity. For example, eminent scholars who suggest that those whom they are authoritatively grouped under the reductive and essentialist term of Muslims are disconnected from the world and its changes. that their society is at least a century behind ours, that all those among them, however numerous, who reject religious totalitarianism and its social dictates, who affirm their secular convictions, and for some who claim their atheism, are traitors to their culture, pawns in the hands of the imperialistic West. That the Iranian mullahs, the Afghan Talibans, the mass murderers from ISIS who stone women, kill feminist activists, whip bloggers, behead apostates, that these represent the real faith of the entire Muslim world. So much the worse for the million of secular Muslims who think that democracy, which derives from human laws, even if it must be constantly monitored, is more tolerable. I don't know what is happening in Norway, but this is precisely what is happening to the Muslim of France. A large part of the left and extreme left has, deliberately allowed an apartheid to take place, which has turned an entire part of the French population into a category of citizens set apart because they are defined primarily by their religion. More than 4.5 million people living on French soil, many born in France and are therefore French citizens, have been assigned to their presumed faith without even considering whether or not they go to the mosque. The left considered that it would be more reasonable to tell to the Muslim community that the Republic recognized them not by their citizenship or by the wish to acquire it, but by the belief that they are supposed to embody. Racism, political and social discriminations, economic fractures are realities that must be denounced and fought. But they will not be fought by religion, which has never given more rights to women and men, but has, on the contrary, always wanted to take them away. A religious right is based on submission, while a social right aims at emancipation. Much more than Islamophobia, whose semantic ambiguity should be denounced, the misnamed Muslims of France are first of all victims of essentialist and communitarian discourses that have reduced them to being the passive representative of a political religious dogma. This is the first of all inequalities that affect them, the one that keeps them in the township of faith. There is a difference between attacking someone for what he thinks and attacking someone for what he is, which is racism. A religious belief is not different from another belief. It is an idea. We are not born believers, but we eventually become one by conviction, by tradition, or by force. I would like now to make an important digression about the Islamic veil. Ever since it became a subject of debate, the veil has been defined exclusively as a religious and cultural sign. It is, but in an incidental way. It is foremost a social sign, a mark of infamy that places the woman who wears it outside the public sphere, in a place sometimes totally erased when wearing a burqa or niqab. The Islamic veil says that women are naturally impure, that they can be equal to the men, that they cannot have the same rights, and that they must abide by his doings. Need we remind ourselves that in countries such as Iran, Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, etc., the veil is imposed not only on Muslim women, but on all women, including foreigners' women. Its main function is not to indicate that they believe in God, but to design them as societally inferior beings who can be submitted to all whims, abuses, discriminations, violence. As we can see in Iran, the veil has even become the symbol of the power of the state. Before being a religious sign, the veil is a banner and a political symbol, and not the most progressive, far from it. Radical Islamists have succeeded in making the veil the ultimate symbol of Islam, was even among theologians, its mention in the Quran is a matter of debate. In our Western democracies, the women who wears it submit, whether we like it or not, to this puritanical, obscurantist, and highly political version of Islam. They submit by conviction, undoubtedly, but also by social pressure to keep the peace in their neighborhood, or sometimes by militancy. In this case, they militate less for the right to wear the veil, which goes with the right not to wear it, than for the obligation to wear it. To associate the veil with freedom, as a scandalous poster campaign financed by the European Union and the Council of Europe did recently, is to insult all Muslim women throughout the world who refuse to wear it, is to despise Iranian women who die because they do not want to wear it anymore. I'm sure that there are more women worldwide who wear the veil to avoid being put in jail or lynched than women who wear it on their own will on their own will with the purpose of expressing a religious conviction. Since last September, the streets of Iran are on fire. Men and women are arrested, put in jail, sometimes killed in cold blood by the authorities of the Islamic Republic. As you know, it all began with the death of a young girl, Mahsa Amini, killed by policemen who claimed that she was not wearing his veil properly. Since then, to tear up their own veil has become, for many Iranian women, the most appropriate way to claim that they cannot tolerate Islamic law anymore. They tear off their own veil because it is the symbol of state power. They do so at their own risk. They can be killed for it. And some of them are killed. Because for the Ayatollahs, to take off the veil is the ultimate blasphemy. I don't know about Norway, but in France, we waited in vain for the reaction of militants, scholars, politicians, and association leaders, usually prompt to react each time the Islamic veil is subject to debate. Generally, they do it to denounce Islamophobia. We wait for the support of these women fighting against a murderous state and for equality. But there was nothing, absolutely nothing. Who still dare to claim that this masquerade is only about defending the right of women to dress as they wish, to exercise the free use of their body, and to manifest their own will? When in Iran, Saudi Arabia, Pakistan, Afghanistan, Malaysia, everywhere where political Islam imposes its religious laws, women risk prison, beatings, whipping, even death to exercise their right to dress as they wish. Yet these so-called human rights defenders don't give a damn. When it comes to fighting for the life and physical integrity of women who wish to walk bareheaded and free-spirited, it is not their problem. They don't think it's worth wasting time and energy on such a bourgeois and neocolonialist cause. Let these so-called defenders of individual liberties at least have the honesty to admit that they are in fact supporting the totalitarian ideology of which the veil is the flag, and which keeps millions of women and men throughout the world in submission. That they are not fighting for human rights, but for a political, religious diktat. I think it's time to affirm that women's rights deserve more than identitarianism and cultural relativism. And I'm sure that Iranian, Afghan, and Saudian women would agree. Among the many accusations that we had to face since we published the Mohammed cartoons in 2006, one is recurrent. These blasphemous drawings hurts nearly 2 billion Muslims, nothing less. First of all, this is to ignore the countless Muslims who are atheist, secularist, or simply indifferent. Second, it's an outrageous exaggeration of the distribution of Charlie Hebdo. Last time I checked, it was still not available in Turkish, Bangladeshi, Pakistani, or Afghan newsstands. And I'm not sure I will find it in the duty free of Riyadh airport. As for the believers who have actually seen these ungodly images, they actually see them just because politicians and religious gurus have stuck them under their noses. They are the ones who deliberately want to offend believers because it's the best way to manipulate them and distract them from the real issues they have to deal with in their own countries. In September 2020, at the opening of the trial of the January 2015 attacks, Charlie Hebdo republished the Mohammed cartoons. Not to provoke anyone, but just because these cartoons were the main evidence in that trial. As expected, we saw many violent protests in front of French embassies all around the Muslim world. People burned French flags and cursed Macron because he didn't put us in jail for blasphemy. In the meantime, the Chinese government continued to have fun, as it has done for several years now, with the Uyghurs, who have, let's not forget, who are Muslims. We are not talking here about cartoons, but about forced re-education, labor camps, deportation, torture, executions. Some even use the word genocide. Has anyone ever seen an angry mob or Islamist in front of the Chinese embassy in Islamabad or Ankara? No, because there were no protests. There are still no protests, and there never will be any protest. The red rag of caricature is waved to continue advancing an ideological pawn. There will always be scholars who will go along with that, who will legitimize terrorism and claim that the victims and at its coming. With their vulgar drawings, their racism, and their neo-colonial wars. But they don't care about reality. The reality is that the majority of Islamist attacks take place in Muslim countries and sometimes target mosques. These postures are not without consequences. For 8 years, the staff of Charlie Hebdo has been working in a bunker, and some of us are under police protection. Is it normal that in a democracy, in time of peace, a satirical newspaper, a newspaper of opinion, any newspaper is forced to live under protection? It is normal for a staff of journalists to be forced to meet behind armored doors? Can we, under these conditions, still speak of full and complete freedom of the press? Every day, democratic principles give way to totalitarian dictates. In a democracy, the greatest enemy of freedom of expression is not censorship, but self-censorship. We'll all have heard this argument. With internet, Facebook, Twitter, and the globalization of information, what we say now in Oslo can be heard in Kabul and be interpreted as a personal attack by anyone. So we must be careful. We must measure our words and our writings, always keeping in mind that they could shock someone, somewhere, here or there, far away, elsewhere, maybe on planet Mars. Who knows? Not that Elon Musk wants to colonize it. We must show respect. We must at all times keep in mind the feelings of those who could accidentally read us, see us, listen to us. At that point, it becomes very difficult to practice journalism. Beware writing that the death penalty is a barbaric act unworthy of a democracy, because that offends the conviction of millions of Americans, Japanese, and Indians who are in favor of maintaining capital punishment in their countries. Beware writing that multinational companies suck the blood of poor countries, because that could offend their executives and senior employees. Beware writing that Putin is a cold-blooded serial killer, because that makes his mother cry. If we journalists had to wonder about the sensitivities of everyone on the planet before picking up our pen or pencil, apart from weather forecast and advertisement, there wouldn't be much left in our newspapers. We have the right to be afraid. Fear is a favorite weapon of totalitarianism in the exercise of its power. But we are to be courageous. But if we have to be courageous, it's just one thing. It is to recognize that we are afraid, and especially to stop hiding behind so-called respect. Because if we respect someone, we bet on his intelligence, not on his stupidity. To respect Muslims, to really respect them, is to stop considering them as a tribe of backward people incapable of understanding a satirical drawing, incapable of reading a column, incapable of admitting an opinion different from their own, disconnected from the world in which they live, and devoid of free will. Of course, there are fools among them. But I dare you to name a single social group that does not have its shares of idiots. If we have to stop publishing just because some assholes, excuse my French, might read us, we might as well close our doors. Now, I would like to tell you about a famous newspaper. No, not Charlie Hebdo, an even more notorious one, the New York Times. Did you know that in July 2019, the prestigious American newspaper decided to permanently remove political cartoons from its international edition, and that political cartoons are already been excised from the national edition a few months earlier? That's what they call all the news that's fit to print. To justify this radical decision, the editorial board gave the following reason. Let's say pretext. A controversy triggered by the publication of a cartoon about Trump and Netanyahu, signed by the Portuguese cartoonist Antonio Moreira Antunes, a cartoon which was considered as anti-Semitic. Pretext, because with this decision, the management of the New York Times has made it clear that the problem was not anti-Semitism, but press cartooning. The New York Times doesn't want any more trouble. And press cartoons, caricature, satire, because they rarely make the political leaders and public figures they attack laugh, because they are increasingly trigger eruptive reaction within groups that proclaim themselves the exclusive defenders of cause or an entire community, these things are trouble. I can say it's a huge surprise because in 2006, the New York Times had refused already to publish, like the majority of newspapers, the Yalın Postan Mohammed cartoons. In January 2015, same thing with the front page of Charlie Hebdo post-attack issue titled All is Forgiven and portraying once again the Prophet Muhammad. The New York Times did it in the name of decent journalism, concerned with no offending anyone. Once upon a time, the pride of the press was to unleash passions. No, its greatest ambition is to avoid stirring up trouble. Of course, no one will pronounce the dirty word of censorship. In the management of the New York Times took this decision, it's just because they didn't want to hurt anyone's feeling, especially those of the oppressed. Of course, there is always a good reason. Censorship means no harm. It doesn't wish to prohibit, but to protect. To protect morality, fatherland, sacred values, decency, good taste, institution, youth, minorities, victims, delicate eyes, fragile ears, shady characters, suffering identities. The extent of its protective mantle is infinite. Censorship protects anything and protects us from everything, starting with ourselves. We were shocked and outraged when the Afghan Taliban demolished the Buddhas of Banyan in 2001. We were even more shocked and outraged when in 2016, ISIS destroyed the remains of Palmyra. We did not hesitate to call them obscurantist barbarians. Bloodshed aside, we are talking about the same impulse, the desire to erase any embarrassing representation, either because it is considered heresy or because it is judged offensive or because it's a source of trouble and we don't want to mess with this or that powerful person, this or that lobby. Press cartoon is unlucky. It can be everything at once. Heretical, offensive, a huge source of trouble. I'm afraid that the managers of the New York Times have forgotten the role of satire on caricature. The first function of satire is to desacralize a leader, belief, or idea, to desacralize a myth, idol. By definition, it's not intended for being lovable or to make friends with those who are the object of it. It must be disturbing. Laughter, even the silliest one, always disturbs something or someone. Satire and caricature are disruptors. They force us to focus on an event, a personality, and to wonder about what their backgrounds are. Satire and caricature are unwelcome in the world of absolute good that religious fanatics and political puritans, both left and right wing, fantasize about. In this world of absolute good, citizens are not considered as responsible adults able to accept criticism, mockery, contradiction, who can laugh of themselves and others, but as bubble children who must be protected from all germs. Children who, of course, do not draw or write or argue. The situation is quite paradoxical. In Western Europe, freedom of expression and freedom of press have been never so protected by law and courts. Despite that, these freedoms are put in jeopardy by individuals or group of individuals in the name of often noble struggles such as anti-racism, feminism, LGBT rights, protection of minorities, etc. They are mostly activists, very well organized, who lobby on social networks, inside university, in the media. They produce a puritanical reflection, absolute good versus absolute evil, which is not necessarily dominant, but which is considered as such by many editorial boards. And they prefer to comply with it rather than facing troll attacks, calls for boycotts, or even a simple controversy. This self-censorship does not take its roots in the respect of the law, but in the fear of being confronted with public opprobrium. In liberal democracies, censorship is no longer a prerogative of the state. It strikes mainly in private structures. It serves multinationals such as Facebook or Google, which do not want to upset their precious users, who are nothing more than moneyed data. It becomes a weapon used by associations militating for the defense of strictly sectorial interests, or by groups of purity fanatics on the lookout for the slightest deviance, or even by single individuals who believe that their emotion or their choices take preference over any other societal or political consideration. If the weight of religion power is present more than ever, it's no longer a matter of decency or good morality. Today, the keywords are identity, culture, feelings, respect. Who can disagree? Since it is not in the name of morality that they want to silence us, but supposedly by in the fight against ideas or practices which, like racism or homophobia, are already punishable by law. This is precisely where we get to the heart of this issue. For the main characteristic of these self-proclaimed censors is that they do not claim any law, because law in democracy generates debate. And these new censors reject debate. They prefer arbitrariness and intimidation to the legitimacy of the courts. They demand cancellation, withdrawal, resignation, erasure, silence, conformism, rewriting, self-denial, and above all, repentance, a good, a good self-thinking. To confront this very pernicious form of censorship is to confront a sort of self-proclaimed popular jury which pronounces sentence without prior trial, and which can just as easily be embodied in a multiple of groups which sometimes contradictory motivation, as in isolated individuals with unfathomable impulses. In other words, the fault can jump out at any time in any way, in a perfectly arbitrary manner. This type of mechanism designed to degenerate fear of or of expressing oneself freely usually take place in totalitarian regimes. In democracy, citizens must be considered as adults and responsible, not as children to be re-educated and punished. I would like to give you an example of this twisted way to promote the defense of human rights. The story took place about a year ago in Toronto and involved. She had a French student studying a poem by Prévert titled Pour toi mon amour, for you my love. A short and beautiful poem. I went to the bird market and I bought birds, for you my love. I went to the flower market and I bought flowers, for you my love. I went to the scrap metal market and I bought chains, heavy chains, for you my love. and I went to the slave market, and I searched for you, but I didn't find you, my love. So far, so good. Well, the same evening, the teacher was informed that a young girl among her students declared herself shocked and having been forced to study a poem racist and glorifying slavery. So she filed a complaint with the school board. Anyone who went to elementary school for a few years will understand that this poem is about the submission that a man demands from his lover. It is not about the slave trade. So we can't assume neither Nadine Couvreu's superiors nor the Toronto District School Board members had been to elementary school. The teacher was suspended and then sanctioned by a disciplinary council. And it was decided that from now on, this poem would no longer be studied in any school of the Toronto District. And maybe in the future, Jacques Préveur's name will be cancelled from all Canadian school books. We should be pleased with the debate and the outspokenness that the Me Too movement has generated. We should fight without any weakness by lawful means against racism, machismo, hatred, and violence of all kinds. But we can do it as if we punished children. If it is only with adult and responsible citizens that we will advance rights and equality. Keeping in mind that no rights, even those that appear to us as the most obvious and ever definitively acquired, obscurantism and totalitarianism are stubborn, and they are always lurking. Progress, whether social, societal, scientific, or intellectual, is never irreversible. It requires vigilance and sometimes combat. As for democracy, it is more than any other a fragile and complicated idea, which requires effort, a lot of energy and determination, not just to make it evolve, but also to keep it from regressing or disappearing. Because retrogrades never give up, and sometimes they work undercover. Thank you for your attention, and patience, and sorry for my bad English, and thank you again for being here. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Gérard Biard, for that fantastic speech. And now we will have the panel up here, and we will discuss these themes more thoroughly. But we need some minutes to just take the mics and stuff. So please welcome on stage Gard Steiro from VG, Anine Kierulf, Roar Hagen. Hallo? Ja, der vi. Jeg håper dere har det bra og ikke fryser det veldig. Jeg ser at Deichmanske sparer på strømmen, men vi får prøve å holde opp varmen. Yeah, thank you all so much for coming. And in this talk, I want to dig a bit further into some of the topics Gérard has addressed, and also hear about the situation in Norway more. What is different from France and what is similar? What are the things we are looking at, and the problems also in Norway? And to help us to get a better understanding of all this, we have a wonderful panel that should stand for most of the talking. And that is Anine Kierulf, Associate Professor in Constitutional Law at the University of Oslo, Gard Steiro, Chief Editor of VG, Verdensgang, directly translated La Marche du Monde, maybe, and Roar Hagen, the political cartoonist in VG since 1986. That's quite impressive. First, I'd like to hear with you three, what are your immediate thoughts about Gérard's speech? Do you have any ideas or criticism or thoughts?
Can I start?
Please.
You hear me? First of all, my condolences to your colleagues. I knew one of them, Tinus, a very nice man. So it was a very, very sad event for all of us, believing in freedom of speech. To your own speech, I would say that I agree on your principle, and I have some remarks. I think you are too easily bypassing the consequences of secularism with the Jacobins and all that lost their head in the revolution and what happened in Russia or the Soviet Union afterwards. But all in all, I must thank you for your emphasizing of the rights for cartoonists, journalists, or whoever who wants to say something in this world. So thank you.
Anine? Yeah.
Yes, just joining in on that. Thanks. That was I was amazed by the way you were able to synthesize all of the debates really relevant to this topic in your speech. So I was very impressed with that. I figured I would just tie on a little bit to the rejection of the ban on blasphemy in Norway, because that was part of the introduction from our hosts today. And it is kind of interesting that this ban was only in 2015 in Norway, I think. And the road leading to that rejection is also quite interesting, because we have the previous Freedom of Speech Commission, Ytringsfrihetsekspert, in 1999, proposing that we reject this ban on blasphemy that hadn't been used since Arnulf Øverland was tried under it in 1933, and only by dissent actually acquitted for being blasphemous. And then in 2004, this was discussed in our parliament. And if I may, I'll just cite from what was said in that debate. And it is said that from a fundamentalist position, almost all critique of religion can be said to be blasphemy. So we agree with the Freedom of Speech Commission that when entering into a multicultural society, we'll have our ability for tolerance tried. What we need is no harsher sanctions against blasphemy, but rather a more extensive and enlightened critique of religion in the full public. So I think everyone here could applaud that. This was just a small minority in parliament at the time, consisting of Arbeiderpartiet and SV, the Labour Party and the Socialist Left Party. Whereas the right side, so Høyre, the Christian Democrats, and Fremskrittspartiet, the Progressive Party, said that the personal faith of individuals may be tied to deep feelings and be existential for identity and self-worth. When religion is ridiculed, religious people may perceive this as an attack on their deepest identity. Speech such as this does not contribute to the realization of the principles freedom of speech is meant to safeguard. So that was then the dominant feeling. And then in 2008 and 9, as you mentioned, the ban was rejected. It was Senterpartiet, who was then in government and led by the party, tried to smuggle it into the hate speech paragraph, actually, and have it be continued as part of hate speech. So then you could be condemned, you could be tried for hate speech by actually being blasphemous. And this almost went without notice until a little blog cried out about it. And then the opposition cried out about it. And then the whole blasphemous smuggling into the hate speech paragraph was rejected, which is now a good thing, because that means that it's very clear after that debate that hate speech does not ban blasphemy. But it is no clearer than in 2019, the police directorate in Norway tried to make an order for the police, one of the police stations in the south of Norway, to stop any demonstrations where anyone were about to burn a Quran. So this was stopped, but the perception of the law was not clearer than that this actually happened before it was reversed. So just a comment on that, we still have some ways to go in thinking principled about free speech, even in Western countries, certainly.
Thank you, Anine.
Yes, thank you, and thank you for, I would say, a great lecture and an important lecture. And it's good to see you here in Oslo, but it's also a bit, I must say, a bit sad to see the security measurement needed for giving lecture like this in Oslo. So even though it's difficult to compare the situation that you live in Charlie Hebdo with most Norwegian newspapers today, the situation is different, and I feel like we have that freedom of speech and freedom of expression in most in Norway. But I think your lecture is a reminder that how fragile it is, and that the responsibility we have to fight for the right to the freedom of speech and freedom of expression, and that it could have been a Norwegian newspaper, it could have been a Norwegian editor that went and published something that provoked someone somewhere, and then ended up in a situation where they're not free anymore. So I would thank you for coming to Norway, and I think I would thank you for still doing your work and still provoking every week, as you did with your Iranian edition a couple of weeks ago. So thank you.
I think also we all know Charlie Hebdo, but I don't think a lot of people actually know the history of Charlie Hebdo and where you come from. But that is also important to keep in mind that your satirical magazine, it was founded in 1970 after the previous magazine had been banned because they made fun of the president Charles de Gaulle. And so in 1970, in France, you could actually ban a magazine for making fun of the president.
Yes. It was banned officially to protect youth.
Yeah, to protect
Of
the
course.
youth. Not the president. That's a smart way to protect the president.
There's always, as I say, there's always a good reason.
Yes, yes. And that you've been mocking every power in France and in the world since 1970. It's kind of like now when you have also, I just read a book, an English academic book about freedom of speech, where one professor just stated that Charlie Hebdo was racist. And this you hear a lot from the left side in the politics. And it's kind of that they mean that from not knowing so much about your history either. And you have been mocking everyone, but also Catholicism a lot, and French nationalism, the writing party Front National, and yeah, mostly anyone who came in your way. And also the magazine ceased publishing in 1981, but was then resurrected in 1992. When you've been working at the magazine since then? Yes. And yeah, before the Muhammad cartoons, it was usually the Catholic Church that was angry with you.
The Catholic Church, the army,
Yeah.
and the right wing. Historically, Charlie Hebdo is a radical left newspaper founded by cartoonists and journalists who were bored about what they read in the papers. It was the 70s, the end of 60s and the 70s. In France, the power of the Gaullism, the power of Charles de Gaulle was very heavy, and it's not by chance that Charlie Hebdo, Harakiri, was his first name, Harakiri Hebdo, was founded in 1969. After 1968, it was after 1968, well, after this huge movement of let's say revolution, that's just the newspaper was founded, and to put another form of journalism, of press, and to give the cartoonist the power to be journalist. It was the first newspaper to where the cartoonists are not. They do not make illustrations. They do not illustrate reports or articles. They make their own reports. They are equals. They are more even important than journalists in Charlie Hebdo.
It's a very unique way of journalism that we can't say we really have in that way in Norway, that you actually, all the cartoonists go out in debates, report, and then they write and make cartoons about it.
Yes.
And I thought it was fantastic how it was Kabu in Blue's book showed, he was unfortunately one of those who was killed during the attacks, but he had managed to make this his way so he could go around and reporting, but not showing that he was a journalist and a cartoonist. He had made a technique how to draw drawings in his pocket.
Yeah, he managed to. I saw him do it.
Yeah.
He managed to draw in his pocket. So he had his paper, his pen, and he drew. I saw him do it. I say, show me. It was a cartoon. It was a cartoon. It was, of course, better than me cartooning, and it was very amazing. It amazed even all other cartoonists.
Although maybe if you had been to somewhere where he was drawing in his pocket, you could maybe assume it was something else he was doing.
No, yeah, maybe because when he was Cabu, when he was drawing, he was always smiling. So maybe.
And how does it feel for you in Charlie Hebdo to now, from the left, that you actually are a part of or started out as, being accused for racism, and then at the same time having the right wing criticizing your work?
It's a strange situation because, as I said, Charlie Hebdo has always been a left newspaper. It still is. And the thing is, in France, maybe in other countries, but in France, it's the case. A part of the left is no more left anymore to me, because they give up the principle. They accuse us of being racist, but I think that they are the racist ones, because they consider that, for example, Muslims are savages because they can laugh, they can't understand the humor, they can't maybe they can read, who knows. It's something very very disturbing, and it's a debate now in France. There is a you have parts of the left who begin to see that there is this is a problem. This is a problem, and for example, the French Communist Party begins to come back to his roots, let's say, and to stand beside us, and for that is rejected by part of the left parties. It's very strange situation, and about the congratulation we can receive by the Front National, for example. Okay, well, we didn't ask for it, and for the record, in 1908, it was 1998, if I remember, we made a petition. It is the word, a petition, signed by, at this time there was no internet, signed by 200,000 people to ban the Front National, because we considered that it was not, and it's still not a democratical party. So we made this petition to ban it, and we went to the Ministry of Interior with with all these letters, and we give the Minister of Interior the petition and officially ask him at this time, ban this party because it's undemocratic. And of course we didn't. but it's strange that now young people on the left side accuse us to be on the, they call it fascosphere, you know, the sphere on the fascists. They call us fascists. Okay, but no, sorry, but you're wrong.
Thank you. And God, as editor of Norway's biggest newspaper, I know the situation is a bit different in Norway than in France, but how is it different, and what do you think are the same problems we are facing here? And you've been in the press for a long time. Have you seen this the same themes in Norway, and how do you react to that as a journalist and as an editor?
I think the situation is different from country to country, and in Norway we are in most areas I would see in pretty good shape when it comes to freedom of speech and freedom of the expression. At least we are lucky in Norway with many newspapers, many media outlets, and a big media outlets. And I think also that when you work in VG or Aftenposten or other newspapers, I think you feel protected in some way. And I'm not that worried about the situation when it comes to attacks on the Norwegian press. We have had some situations. I mean, we had an attack just down the street on the Pride parade, or the bars during Pride in Oslo. It's the building next to VG in Aftenposten. So we know that we have a situation now with responsible for that terrorist attack discussing to kidnap journalists. So there are a risk in Norway. I think what I'm most worried about is the chilling effect that the attack on Charlie Hebdo and Jyllands-Posten case had. Because I think we have the freedom to publish, and I think if we publish, we will be protected. I think that the Norwegian government learned something from the Mohammed discussions. I hope they learned something from that. So I think that if we dare to publish, we will have the protection from the government. The question is, will we dare to publish? Will an editor or a journalist or a media house take the risk to publish? And I think that is the question we need to discuss in Norway.
And will you take that risk?
I think it's easy to say yes on that, but I remember when Charlie Hebdo was attacked, because I was at work in Bergens Tidende, and we had a discussion in the editorial, the editors, and we said, okay, we are going to publish all the cartoons from Charlie Hebdo and all the cartoons from Jyllands-Posten at the day after the attack. And I remember standing in the newsroom, we had a meeting with all the journalists, and I said that, okay, we have decided to do this, we're going to publish it tomorrow. And most of the staff applauded it. But you could see that some of the staff, they were really afraid. They were really afraid for this decision. So I will say that I will dare to publish it, and we have published it in VG. I think we will publish the cartoons again and again when it's relevant. But it's difficult when you see people afraid for their lives going to work. It's so. And this is the situation. We have to remember that it's not there is an acute risk of being attacked in Norway, but there is a risk that we are afraid of publishing.
Yeah, you were talking a lot about censorship and also this chilling effect. And I am thinking then for the cartoonists, it's one thing to be the editor of a newspaper and saying I'm there, but the most political cartoonists in Norway are also freelancers working at home for often a small fee payment. And this self-censorship and this chilling effect must have a specific, they need a lot of courage to think, well, this will probably put me in a lot of problems, but I will do it. And my address is just one click away, and I have I'm not sitting in a big press house where there's security. And Roar Hagen, you are so fortunate that you actually are employed in VG. But what are your thoughts on this chilling effect, and how have you experienced it the last 40 years of your career?
Well, the short story is that I've been so lucky to be employed and protected by my editors up to this day in both this newspaper and my former newspaper. And there is a protection also in working for the biggest one. Could be a hard decision for the politicians not to support the newspaper if a occasion should occur. But there is, you could say, two levels of rights here. You have the legal rights decided and voted for in the parliament. This is the law. You are able to publish what you like. You can express what you like. And there is another one. If you do so, your life will be changed overnight. You can be killed like a goat in the street on your way to work or to the shop. And your family will have this uncomfortable position to be under protection and surveillance day and night. So is this something you want for yourself and your employer and your government and your family and your neighbors? You can do so. This is the real life for a cartoonist. And why is cartoons, why are they so powerful? Why do they have this power to define? Well, there is a long history of cartooning, which goes way back to the Reformation, where cartoons were propaganda, you could say. It had nothing to do with democracy. It was a way to define your enemy. For the Lutherans, that was the Pope. For the Brits, it was Napoleon Bonaparte. And it is said that he feared the British cartoonist more than the British army. And why so? Because they had the ability to define him as the small corporal, you know, the Corsican, a ridiculous depiction of him, which he disliked a lot. Like we see today with Putin and Erdogan, for instance. So to stand in this position takes a lot of commitment. It takes a lot of protection. What does it take? It takes an editor. First of all, you need an editor, and you need the protection by the law, and you need the courage, and you need to inform yourself about what's going on in society. As I started this profession, it was very simple. Oslo was a small, white, provincial capital. It was not even, maybe a few French married to Norwegian women walking around freezing in the winter, you know, kind of stranded here. That was all. No garlic in the shops. It was no people from Middle East, Africa, or elsewhere. And the world was very simple. A cartoon published in the biggest newspaper in Oslo would not spread among the readers. It would not mutate into the Middle East or somewhere, alienated. Even if I was published in Le Monde or the New York Times at the time, before they chickened out, or anywhere, you could be sure that your cartoon is read in a context understandable for you. Now it's very different. This is a time of projection where anyone can project anything into what you do. This makes it extremely challenging to stand in this position, but it's also more interesting, and it's even more meaningful than it used to be. So I hope that the press will stand by their cartoonists. And if so, if you do not want just an illustrator, we are not illustrators. As you mentioned, we are independent commentators. Then it has to be institutionalized and protected. And say, this is something we want. This is something we need for the future, for the democracy, and for the common speech, and for the cooperation of diversity. This is a part of diversity. So, thank you.
Thank you. We were talking a bit about the hate paragraph and the blasphemic law that is now finally gone. And we have had some discussions, debates in the Norwegian press about racism. What are you allowed to say and not? And I just read your book, Ytringsfrihet, where you are explaining in a quite easy to read way how what free speech is and how it works in Norway. And I think about this debate that most people think that the laws are a lot stricter than they actually are. we think a lot of stuff is not allowed, but actually the legal room is a lot bigger than what we think is socially acceptable. And why is that so? And why shouldn't the law restrict it a lot more so that people can't be told hurtful things on the street, for example?
That the law is always a lot wider than the social reactions, because as human beings, that's our first way of controlling each other, right? Through social reactions against whatever people are saying. And so dissenters and provocateurs and everyone who goes against the majority are perceived as a threat. And I think that's a very sort of biological fact, really, the way that humans work. And that's one of the reasons why the legal framework needs to be really wide for what you are allowed to say, and so that the state actually protects you against the mob when they react socially to what you're saying. But that doesn't really help much if the mob is weaponized, right? Yeah. So that's the problem here. And what we talk about a lot today is the mob that's not weaponized with anything else than social sanctions, which can be harsh enough, and which is driving people out of politics. They don't want to be in politics anymore because it's such a harsh climate of debate and social media. And that's a real problem for democracy as well. But I think we need to remind ourselves time and time again that the real threat is the threat of terror against some kinds of speech. And it's remarkable. And we're talking about the chilling effect. I just feel the chilling effect from being in the room. I'll try to keep speaking still, but it's good, right? We have a strict ban on censorship in Norway, but that's from the state. And the most effective way of having people censor themselves is through self-censorship. And how do you do that? Well, you scare them from saying what they want to say, or printing what is fit to print. And I think even with the cartoons today, even with the thought that has been going on since the first cartoon debates in 2006 and the realization after the terror attack on Charlie Hebdo, it's still quite an extensive self-censorship in these kinds of cases. When the teacher, what's his name? Samuel Paty was brutally killed from showing the cartoons in his classroom. All the newspapers wrote about it. No one showed the cartoons that he showed in the classroom. I mean, from just the standards of the press in general, of course you would do that. It's a very important thing to show those illustrations that actually led to that murder. And they didn't. And why didn't they? I think they didn't even think about it. It was so clear that that's not what they did because of the potential effects of publishing those cartoons. And it's still leading us to self-censorship in an extensive way, I think. And that's a paradox.
Roar, do you want to comment on it?
I want us to remember that as we came out of the absolute kingdom, you were having your revolution in France and giving way to the ideas of freedom of expression, which was taken into the Norwegian constitution in 1814, with one exception, the religious rights. To have religious freedom has been more difficult than to have other freedom of expression. And this goes way back to the Spanish Inquisition, to the Night of the Bartholomeus in France, to the Reformation, and to the, of course, the 30 Years' War. And here it was absolutely demanded to belong to the evangelical Lutheran faith, the Augsburg thesis. And we didn't want anyone else here. No Jews, no Catholics. Muslims was not even mentioned because they could probably not imagine a modern migration as we see today. But in fact, the Jesuits was not allowed to enter this kingdom until 1956, decided in the parliament. So I think we must understand that the freedom fighters like cartoonists or editors or others are having a common interest with religious people to protect the general rights, which allows people to worship their religion in the West. And what we see now in Russia and other places in India is that religion is becoming again a part of the nationalism as a tool for the rulers. So all in all, we have common interests in this, which is very important to remind ourselves about every day. Instead of fighting and killing each other in the streets, we have common interests.
Could we show one of your drawings? I think we have a lot of problems today, but we've also come a long way from the Muhammad cartoons. And here we see what happened was it in 2004 that the famous Karikaturenes happened? And it's very sad because Shabana Rehman, Pakistani Muslim woman, a stand-up comedian, she died just some weeks ago from cancer. And she did in her stand-up show maybe do you know about it?
You told me
Yeah,
yesterday.
I told you yesterday. She lifted this mullah on stage, and he got extremely angry and said, "You can't do this. You can't do this."
Don't touch me.
Yes, yes. And she did this, and I don't think the broader population in Norway understood what she was doing. And God, maybe you can comment a bit on, you were in the press then too, and did we realize how courageous she was? And
No, I think it took some time for us to realize what she meant and what she was doing. And I think there are few pictures of this, not many pictures, and I don't think it created that much debate at all in the start. And but I think it's an important moment actually when it comes to freedom of expression and the mocking of mullahs and religious leaders actually. So I think this was an important moment and a kind of a proud moment, I would say. Of course, for Shabana Rehman, but also for it's an important moment in Norwegian media history.
you can show the next one. So you've been drawing this several times.
This is not a kind of bravery at all. Actually, it was very natural for me to protect her at the time and not be among those who became friends with her the week between her pass away and the funeral, as it was said in the funeral. So it was very obvious. But this is not a dangerous drawing as I see it. As in Islam, there is no prophet after the prophet. So a provincial mullah in Norway cannot be a prophet. Maybe he sees himself as a holy man, but he is not a holy man. And it's very important to know these distinctions between how your cartoon is understood and translated.
Can I just ask, why did you the other drawing with Pippi Longstocking? What was the symbolic there?
It was just a symbol to support any female power. Actually, I don't see her as an ethnicity or a religion. I see her as an individual fighting for rights, and that was very clear. And I didn't have to think it over at all. Of course, we have to support her. And she was typically very lonely at the time. Many feminists looked the other way or turned a blind eye to her problems.
And the Norwegian left intellectuals,
of course,
were not so happy with her way of.
No, she was provoking. She was dangerous. She was kind of rude to, all this stuff, all this shit. So, no, it's just an obvious drawing for me. This it has nothing to do with bravery. Actually, I will not be killed for this one.
We were talking a bit about this. This is then Charlie Hebdo special number from 7th of January.
Quite interesting, I must say.
And the funny thing is, among all the gentle things the Mullah said to us after this publication, they say that Charlie Hebdo is unrespectful with women.
Yeah, they
Yeah.
do.
But Mr. Biard, could you the reactions from Iranian living both in Iran and Iranians living abroad? Can you tell something about that?
Yes, we received. So we have two kind of reactions after this publication, because we made that contest. I have to explain why we made that contest, because since 8 years now, our first issue of January is dedicated to not to the attack, but something for a topic about the attack, about religion, about freedom of speech, about censorship, everything. So we ask ourselves, what are we going to do this year? And we discussed it, and at what time it was obvious we had to do something about Iranian people fighting against the mullah, because they're doing the same thing that we do, and that we did. They're fighting against political and religious power. They don't want it anymore. So we launched this contest, and we received in 3 weeks we received more than 400 cartoons from all over the world. So we published a few ones, the best ones and the most relevant, and so after that we had two kind of reaction. The reaction of the Iran government, as you know how it react, and more interesting, we received hundreds and hundreds of messages from Iranians, Iran men and Iran women all over the world, even from inside of Iran, which is very courageous from there, and thanking us for this publishing, for these cartoons, for publishing these cartoons, and there were these messages are very emphatic, very Persian. They want to send us flowers. They want to actually they send us flowers because on the 7th of January there were a group of Iranian women who went to put flowers behind our former offices in Rue Nicolas Appert, where the attack took place. So they thanked us for just as if we were in the streets with them. It was very strange, and they said you are. There is something they came back on all over the messages. There is a sentence that come back all over the messages. You are on the right side of the history. They think, they take it. And maybe it will make people, general people, understand that what we did with Muhammad's cartoons was not about religion, was about politics. It's and because for this cartoons. For these cartoons, the mullahs accuse them again of blasphemy. They're not really, they're not God, they're not prophets, but they think themselves they are. So they think they incarnate the power of God. They're just human beings. They're just tyrants. But so it was very pleasant for us and very comforting for us to receive these hundreds and hundreds of messages, and we still receive them. They continue to send us because after we made another one.
Yes, so the consecutive, well, first I'll just say, yeah, it's mullahs are returning to where they come from. And then you have the next one, the next week's edition. Oh, we needed them a week to find our way out.
Yes, because series, the mullahs definitely doesn't understand nothing with women. And we took a week to find a way out.
And they are dirty. It's very nice. You can't see it, but like if you go close up, they are like, well, they had a hell of a week. And God, what these kind of drawings are not the typical cartoons, political cartoons you are publishing in VG. I mean, Charlie Hebdo, you have your very own typical style. But could you print these? And or would you like say no? Oh, Roar, that's too dirty.
Well, I think we could have. This is a different tradition than ours. That's important to understand. I must say, but
Let's talk about traditions.
Yeah, but I have never said no to Roar. Have I, Roar? No, I've never said no. So if he had walked into my office with this cartoon, I probably would have had some thoughts about it, but I would never have said no. I would say, okay, let's publish. And I don't think this is different from, this is obviously criticizing the movements in Iran. So I don't think of course, there is a risk that you could offend someone here, but I think this is a great piece of journalism, and it's important to print it. So why would you have drawn this? I think that's the question.
We have different styles, we have different decisions every day. So actually, for my own part, from the very beginning, I have not used so much like genitals and sexual statements in my drawings, even though you could be very, very popular in the 70s and 80s, or let's say before the breakdown of the Iron Curtain. This was the most dignified and brave cartoon you could make. It was all about sex or kind of blasphemy at the time towards Christian. And since then, that has been more irrelevant, but this is not irrelevant. This is a particular statement to criticize the Ayatollahs of Iran. So I don't think I would have had the idea to do it, even though if God would allow me to print it, because I have a kind of personal limit. What would my daughter say? It's more that your inner feeling. There is no obligation to print, to make anything. You have to follow your heart. And I'm not around to fulfill some kind of expectations or bravery. What I try to do every day is to make something relevant, which is giving some kind of meaning, some kind of possibility to think for yourself. That's my ideology, if you like. But I respect any cartoonist expression. And we are different. Thank God we are different. We are very different. If someone is different, it's cartoonists. A convention of cartoonists is a convention of individualism to the extreme. And that's why we are cartoonists. And we belong to the editor's orchestra, if you like, to the editor's toolbox when he is or her work to, perform democracy. To have a cartoonist or two or three is something that brings you more close to the core of cartooning, the core of democracy. And we must keep in mind, political cartooning, as we know it, came with democracy. And I think, and I believe very strongly that political cartoons will die with democracy also, and slide back to what it was before the democracy occurred into activism or propaganda.
God, you want to comment?
I think that we are discussing now whether cartoonists would do this, and if editors have the courage and to publish them. But I think you mentioned something interesting in your lecture as well. You mentioned Facebook and Google, and I think in the years to come we have to discuss the infrastructure of freedom of speech globally. Because the question is not whether I could publish this or not, but could I publish this and spread it to my readers through social media? Will that be possible in 2025 or 2027? And we see some examples now that, this is a threat for freedom of speech. At least the possibility to spread information and spread journalism and spread cartoons like this. We see this on Snapchat during the Ukrainian war. When we try to publish pictures of injured people, they take it down because we show body fluids, and that is not accepted on Snapchat. And now the fastest growing media in the world is TikTok. And it's like the Frankenstein of social media. It's owned by the Chinese government. We don't have control of the data. We don't know whether they use this for surveillance. And we don't know if it's possible in a few years to publish these types of cartoons there. And at least, could you criticize China on that platform? Is that possible at all? So I think this is a different part in these discussions. And I think that this is a threat for political cartoonists, almost as big as editors that don't dare to publish.
Anine, did you think, is there anything the law to protect free speech against Facebook, against these huge, big social media outlets? Are there anything one can do to make them publish that they don't censor? How can the law help? Is it any way possible?
I would be quite rich if I were to answer that question, I think. No, I think that's a great question. And what they say that China invents and the US invests and the EU regulates. And so the EU is trying to regulate some of these things, but mainly in a way that restricts some kinds of speech, not in a way that forces other countries to spread kinds of speech. So no, I don't think there's a way of regulating yourself out of this. And the thing about law is that it always runs after the technical developments in the real world, and it is very slow. It is democratic. Democracies are slow in regulating things. So I think in order to try and come to terms with this kinds of development, we need to rely on the same kinds of technological development, not necessarily in regulation, but in understanding how these technologies work and how they work against the democratic and free speech principles that at least parts of the world sets very high. So no, I don't think there's an easy way out of this, unfortunately. But I do think, and I'm glad you brought it up, Gard, because this is the question that we can't get around with our principled discussions in the way that we do here. But certainly the way to think about it going forward, because the infrastructure for using free speech is a prerequisite for actually having free speech.
We have to wrap up a bit. You wanted to?
Gerard, did you have a
No,
last comment?
Just one thing. If you want to draw such a thing, such a cartoon, even in France, you have to be published in Charlie Hebdo, because the Monde will not take it. Definitely, we are the only one who will take it.
I think
it's linked. This kind of cartoon is linked to the story of Charlie Hebdo. As I said, it is a newspaper born in the 70s, after 1968, and the main controversy at this time was to draw a naked woman. It was outrageous at this time, and it's no more the case. It's not the case anymore. It's not outrageous. I don't think so. And a few people in France think it's outrageous. The subject is not what is important in a cartoon. It's not the subject. It's not what do you see in this cartoon? Do you see a naked woman, or more or less out of an asshole?
if you
The subject of the cartoon are the more or less, not the woman. You know, it's always important in a cartoon to ask what I'm looking at. What is the matter? What is the real message of this cartoon?
Well, I think it's a very funny cartoon. Do not misunderstand me. I think it's great. What it reminds me about is the cartoons of the great painter Lucas Cranach, and in his service for the Reformation, where the Pope was born from the rectum of the devil. You know.
Yeah.
So this is not a new expression. It has been used before, and it can be recycled like this. I think it's great. But on a direct question, would I make it myself? Probably not, but I'm not sure. Maybe one day it will be obvious that this is the idea. I can make another version of it. It depends. But so far, I haven't put my editor under pressure with this. Not really stay, but I can do it just to test him, you know.
Biard, thank you. I want to finish by asking you, well, your life has changed radically since 2015. You have police protection 24 hours a day, and but still you continue to challenge and to be a satirical journalist and provoking. And why are you continuing? I guess if you had stopped being in Charlie Hebdo, you could have retreated and living a much calmer life. So what is it that keeps you on going and doing this work?
Because I don't know nothing else. I can do nothing else. No, more seriously, because my first feeling after the killing was not fear. But I must say, as you know, I was not here. So maybe if I were in the offices and I was still alive, maybe I will say, okay, it's over for me. Some did, and I can understand them, but it's not my case. And so my first feeling was not fear, was anger. So think we had to go on because to stop was to say these terrorists are right to do that because it's terrorism is nothing more than racket. You know, if you pay the racket, the price is always higher. You will always have to pay. So the better way to stop racket is stop paying. So we won't pay. We won't pay the racket. So we go on.
Thank you so much.
There, everyone, on behalf of Human-Etisk Forbund, the Norwegian Humanist Association, I would like to thank you very much for your contribution, Gerard. I don't think we could have a better start of the series of lectures, the Øverland-foredraget. So we have some flowers for you.
Okay. Do they come from Ireland? No, they don't. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you.
And I will also give a big thank to Erle, Anine, Gard, and Roar for a very interesting conversation and your valuable insights. As a sign of our gratitude, we have your book from Erle. I don't know if you have it. Karikaturenes historie, fra hulemalerier til Charlie Hebdo. And if you already have it, you can exchange it into another by the Humanist Forlag, which is the end. And Erle, since I think that you probably have your own book, you can choose any other book you want from our publisher down there. So to all of you in the audience, I would hope that you can save the date for next year on the 21st of January in your calendars. On this date, in exactly 1 year from now, we will be back with another Øverland lecture, hopefully also that one til offentlig forargelse. So please be warned. So the only thing for me left to say is thank you all for coming. Be safe on your way home and hope to see you all again next year.